Our next deep dive session focuses on an industry that's very much in the global news. Sri Lanka as a pharma manufacturing destination. The panel will feature top policymakers and private sector heads. And the panel will be moderated by Ms. Savitri Rodrigo. Over to you, Savitri.
Medicine sales globally will reach $1.18 trillion by the year 2024, which is an annual growth of 6.9%. And governments worldwide are looking to boost access to patients of affordable medicine and preventable health care. Demographics are shifting to manufacturing in the Asia Pacific due to better GDP per capita and pro-domestic manufacturing policies, especially in South Asia. Currently, given Sri Lanka's universal healthcare regime, the government alone purchases $325 million of pharmaceuticals. 30% of the government budget is spent on procurement, as 85% of Sri Lanka's medicine needs are imported, which means forex reserves are impacted significantly. And with COVID, what has come to light is that Sri Lanka must have self-sufficiency, at least for essential medicines. The country is moving towards local manufacturing aggressively, therefore, as pharmaceutical security is essential for the country's economic development. So today, with some key voices in both policymaking and industry, we look at the advantages Sri Lanka has to not just be self-sufficient, but also to become a key exporter of pharmaceuticals. With me today, right beside me to my right, is the Secretary, State Ministry of Production, Supply and Regulation of Pharmaceuticals, Dr. R.M.S. Ratnayaka. To my left, Sanjay Mahotala, who's the Chairman of the Board of Investment of Sri Lanka. To my far left, Sanjay Jayaratna, who's the Chairman of the Sri Lanka Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association. And to my far right, Murtaza Isufali, Chairman, Hemas Pharmaceuticals, Morrisons and Hemas Hospitals. Let me start with the gentleman to my right, both Dr. Ratnayaka and Murtaza. If we look at the pharma industry in Sri Lanka, what is the role that Sri Lanka actually plays in the global pharma supply chain? Maybe Dr. Ratnayaka, you can start off.
Actually, the new secretary to the Production, Supply and Regulation Ministry of Sri Lanka, State Ministry. I'm very happy to attend this the forum. Actually, our domestic, we know the expenditure for pharma is $665 million. So, which we expected to increase it by 2020, $750. Now you can see how it's shooting up. And our local production, Sri Lanka, only 50% of the domestic is manufactured, only 15% Sri Lanka. So 85% is from we import from other countries. So we are the bigger, I think in Asia, the biggest importer of the pharmaceutical material from different drugs from different countries. So this can't go on like this. So we need a lot of manufacturers to come in, because the present policy of this government is increase manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity about 60%, from 15% to 16%. Because the supply lane, you know that we are in the next to pharmacy, the world of India, and we actually we are close to the Chinese government, and the Chinese government is the most largest supplier for pharmaceutical ingredient to the world. So we are in the world of pharmacy and between the largest supplier of pharmaceutical ingredient. Therefore, we are in a between in the pathway. So, therefore, I think this is strategic point. Sri Lanka is a very good strategic point to invest on pharmaceutical industry and start increased manufacturing of pharmaceutical products in Sri Lanka.
Murtaza, you
Yes, I mean, Sri Lanka has have a fast-growing pharmaceutical manufacturing industry. Still in the last 5 years, we have $100 million industry here. We have global companies like GSK who have been here for decades and are actually not also exporting from here. And our proximity to India and to Pakistan and these pharma hubs as a lower cost, easy to do business and easy to live country. We can be a very good alternative destination for these big pharma companies to come and set up here or to partner with the 15 or so local players. There's been about $150 million of investment that has happened in this industry in manufacturing, from oral solid dosage to injectables to more complex products. But with our proximity to these markets, with an easy place to do business, and the proximity to the pharma emerging markets, we would be we could be a viable manufacturing center, perhaps even in partnership with some of these big companies who may look for a lower cost, easier to do business place.
And can I ask Mohtala, where does Sri Lanka fit in, given what Murtaza also just said now? Where does Sri Lanka fit in that greater equation of South Asia's very competitive pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, given our proximity to India and also Pakistan and Bangladesh?
I think, Savitri, it's a good question. I think if you look at in a direct comparison, one would ask, what does Sri Lanka really have to offer? But I think if you step back and look at from the global geopolitical point of view, I think what Secretary also alluded, there's a lot that's happening. So one is that if you look at the API concentration, so most of the generic API concentration is 70% between China and India. Then if you look at the drug manufacturing with the generics, India is the biggest location, vaccines and so on and so forth. But one thing that the pandemic had really taught us was that, the supply chain resilience is one of the critical things that is needed for an essential product like pharmaceuticals. So Sri Lanka, if you look at in that sense, provides a very compelling value proposition, right, to the world. Because once we are an island, we can easily take things under control. We are not as small as Maldives in terms of the number of population. And if anybody was listening to all the proceeding the last 3 days, we talked about the IP protection regimes that we are having. We talked about the quality of individuals, the know-how, the capabilities we have. We talked about the connectivity that Sri Lanka offers. We talked about the maturity of the manufacturing sector, both pharma and non-pharma, and supporting industries do matter. Enabling legislation, we talked about entities like BOI, how we facilitate. And the cost of doing business at the end of the day, because it's a utility cost in terms of access, so on and so forth. So if you think all in context, companies wants to diversify. Right? If you look at the vaccines and some of the things that happen, well, they're looking for alternative manufacturing locations. So being proximity, like say, for example, take an story of China and Vietnam. Some of the manufacturing is located in Vietnam because of the proximity. But you do take advantage of this separation to get that resilience you need, or in the case of pharma, of course, not much trade barriers, but things like that. And then the part of it is not just manufacturing the molecules and things that what you're looking at today, but it is like you're going to get customized medicine at some point of the day, right? So when those kind of evolution happens, you need a lot of analytics, you need to have capabilities, you need to build it. So we are looking at a 10-year horizon. So then if you look at in that point of view, Sri Lanka has actually much more to offer than what meets the eye.
Why do you think, Sanjay, that it makes this Sri Lanka is an ideal investment opportunity right now?
I think first of all, I would like to say that we take the past. Right now, there's so much focus by the government on pharmaceutical manufacturing industry that we can see by the separate a state ministry created for pharmaceutical manufacturing, which was never there before. So with that comes a lot of incentives to set up a plant here. As Secretary mentioned, we are 85% import dependent on pharmaceuticals. We cannot move like this throughout. All our neighboring countries are self-sufficient on pharmaceuticals. So we have to move there very fast. So hence the reason why this is a good place to invest and to start JVs with existing companies or come and invest here. This would be the way forward.
Mortale, would you agree that that would be the way to go from an investment perspective?
I would say absolutely. I think, meaning as an investor, you would look at two things, right? As Sanjay mentioned, like one is the supporting ecosystem. One is the focus that's been put in by the government itself, the regulators say like, look, there is a ministry just to focus on it. The second part of it is the incentives. This is, I would say, the icing on the cake, value proposition even better. And the third part of it is the return. The return in terms of a local market, which is close to about 600 million to be localized. I'm not saying that we are going to ever be self-sufficient, but that shows you the opportunity. And if you look at this, it's not 30, 40, 50, 60 drugs that you're talking about, because there's always a Pareto analysis. There are a lot of drugs and which accounts for majority of it. And the incentive regime that is also been offered. I think, look, we are one of the countries where our capital accounts are open for investors to come in, and you can expatriate all the profits that you get. And as BOI, we will facilitate seamless and free importation of all your capital goods and your production facilitation. You can bring your the capabilities you need. So if you look at in that point of view, your returns are quite healthier compared to many other countries. There's no hidden profits, or there's no hidden taxes or income taxes for a period. And you are free to take the profits back or reinvest, whichever you choose to do. So in that sense, I concur with Sanjay. I think there's not been a better time for this segment to attract investment. And I think one thing I almost forgot is whenever an investor comes in, if you're a financial investor, different thing, but whenever a large multinational comes in, they always look for dance partners. And you have few around this panel. And I think that is a strength which we didn't have 5-10 years ago.
And Dr. Ratnayaka, also Murtaza, feel free to add to this. What are Sri Lanka's strengths in the pharma manufacturing industry?
As I mentioned, geographical location is very good strength. And our workforce, the educated workforce is other one. Because you can find the needy people for the industry from the Sri Lanka itself, maybe except few. But otherwise, we can get our workforce into it. And I think incentivization from the government also plus point. And in addition to that, there are government policy. The topmost policy is to manufacture 60% of pharmaceuticals in Sri Lanka. So with that policy, there is a plan to develop 3 zones. One is at Hambantota pharmaceutical zones, and Oyamaduwa pharmaceutical zones, and Millava. Horana, there is other one. So that was open now. Now the construction is now started. So those are the strengths for this.
Come to my mind. Power. The cost of power is half the cost of India, Bangladesh or Pakistan. Our pharmaceutical industry gets charged about 6 US cents per unit of electricity. Whereas in most parts of India, pharma zones, it's about 13 cents. Pakistan, Bangladesh, hovering between 10 and 13 cents. We invested $18 million in a new oral solid dosage plant as HEMAS because, we knew that we have about 4,000 science graduates coming out every year. And for every opening we had about 35 applications for one position. And all trainable, disciplined, English speaking, good quality graduates. And The third P is partners, as Sanjay was saying. Those of us who have been in this, about 15 companies have been around for decades and understand the science of what we need is partners who can take us to the next level, higher end molecules, new technology, because we have high learning agility, our people. You can see industry after industry who have come and invested here, they are happy with the ability of our people to learn and to be able to commit themselves to an organization fully and to understand international standards. Proximity, many Indian pharma companies I talk to, they say that we are closer. Sri Lanka, most of Sri Lanka is closer than going to Baddi, which is a big pharmaceutical hub in India. 1 hour plane ride, 2 hour plane ride, and they can get to any. So it's easy to transfer those skills. We have a similar culture with the rest of South Asia. So those are the reasons why we've invested, and we know that government after government consistently has been asking for and insisting on local manufacturing, investment for manufacturing for Sri Lanka and for the world. We also represent about 50 of the world's biggest pharmaceutical manufacturers as their local distribution partner here. And many of them are very interested to contract manufacture for us because our conversion costs are competitive. Maybe the bigger companies can procure API a little cheaper than us because they have the scale. But many of us, have plants that produce well over 500 million tablets, which is what McKinsey says is the sort of number that you have to get past to be competitive. Conversion costs. So if we can partner with some of these regional companies and together buy API at the cost that they can buy, our conversion costs are competitive because power is half the cost, people are less, the cost of people are less, and with the concessions that the government and BO are giving on land and infrastructure, it's a good deal.
Mohtal, Murtaza mentioned, or everyone's been talking about our competent HR. If there are gaps in HR and the transferability of skills, is there a possibility for skills to be got from outside, for talent to be got from outside and bring them in if we are looking at expanding like this?
Yes, sir. Oh, sir, meeting.
Yes, indeed. I think one of the things that we fundamentally provides and give an assurance to all the investors, and not just Pharma, any other investor who comes in through BOI, is the ease of getting the talent that you require. And I think for certain specialized skills, and I'm sure the gentlemen here have already brought in a certain amount of workforce to build certain capabilities. And I think that is required because it is not just like any other industry where you install a machine and start. You need to go through a certification process and all that. So I think those capabilities, we have to bring that in and build it. And that is something that we readily facilitate. And I think that's one of the advantage that you get being in Sri Lanka in that sense.
Has the pandemic changed the equation in any way to give Sri Lanka maybe a bigger advantage or a competitive edge in any way?
Yes, I would like to think so, and I say this because of some of the discussions that I had. I think many look for the supply chain resilience in a way, Savitri. Supply chain resilience means having multiple locations for critical products, but also in a way of being close to home or being India +1 strategy. So that has been there. We see that in ICT, we see that in pharmaceutical in terms of the how do I say, the request that comes through. So I think this is definitely an opportunity. I think what we have talked about is the macro tailwinds, which is the Sri Lanka opportunity, a market which is growing, demand for pharmaceutical, changing in the nature of the pharma part. And then you also have additional tailwinds put in because of the supply chain realignment that's happening, partially because of pandemic, honestly, partially because of the geopolitical shifts as well.
Sanjay, when you look at Sri Lanka and what you being in there, in the industry, in a practical sense, what are the gaps that you would like investors to come in for and fill those in so that you all can work to your optimum?
So, in Sri Lanka for last 25 or more years, we've had companies that's been manufacturing basic products. Those are normal tablets, capsules, and syrups. So, ideally, investors should come in to manufacture more complex products. Then, I mean, they will have a monopoly in this market because government is now talking about having a competitive bidding system in future only for local manufacturers. So in that case, if investor would come and set up a plant to manufacture, as an example, maybe biosimilars, biobetters, then obviously there is a big chance of they will have a monopoly for a certain number of years. It's a big opportunity for any investor.
Murtaza, would you like to add to that?
So repeat the question.
No, I just wanted to know what are the areas that you would like an investor to come in to fill in that gap so that we can expand and be at our optimum?
Yes, I mean, in addition to what Sanjay says, like cancer drugs, Sri Lankan government is one of the largest purchasers probably in the world of cancer drugs, because which other country in the world gives free cancer drugs to patients? And therefore, it's very important that the government also tries to buy from the country and develop an industry in the process. I think it's something like 50 billion that's being spent on cancer treatment. And the other thing is that with local partners, we are able to leapfrog and invest into the latest technology today. We don't have legacy factories, too much of that. I mean, even and I think if an investor can see Sri Lanka not as Sri Lanka but as a hub that's very conveniently located to send their experts from all over, because this is a beautiful place to live. It's a very safe place to live. It's a easy place to do business, and you can attract like probably the Singapore's did 30-40 years ago, as a nice place to live. They're going to for the children to be educated, so people can come here from more difficult places and have have access to all the regions, whether it's the universities, the research hubs, the research centers, where they do clinical trials. Everything is very close by, and I think we find that our NMRA itself, our regulatory body, is also looking to go to an advanced level of rating by WHO standards. That also will encourage, because that means when they accept a registration, it can be accepted in many parts of the world.
Dr. Ratnayaka, Murtaza was mentioning the NMRA standard. How do Sri Lanka's policies and general regulatory these things match up to investor sentiment and expectation?
Now, the regulatory NMRA is a regulator of this country. Actually, recently, 2015 only this act was passed. Now we have a nice framework, a very good framework of robust oversight to this industry by the regulations. So now that is it is the ministry duty to strengthen this by giving the evaluators and regulators, the competent people in it. Only few people now. The issue is with the few people can't do as what we expected as the suppliers or industry people expected. So we need to strengthen that place. Actually now the WHO, now we are in the level 1. According to the WHO classification, we are in level 1. Now at least then the level 2 and then level 3. So we have a roadmap given by the WHO. And all the processes and the systems are lined up. Now we are, at the moment, the NMRA is making their, the processes are clearly going in accordance with the WHO guideline. So we will move into a second level, hopefully another 2-3 years time. Then ultimate our aim is to move to level 3 level. Once we become the level 3, then I think our manufacturers as everybody is recognize the WHO category.
And given that the pharma industry the world over is highly regulated, are Sri Lanka's regulations and compliance and occupational health safety standards, or all those, are they in place, and how good are they when is it comparable is what I would like to know, Sanjay.
In regulation, there's one more thing I would like to mention here. There is something called local manufacturer's advantage that NMRA gives us. So whoever who comes and invests and puts up a plant here, there are many advantages in terms of registration on fast track basis. So that is actually given by the government to encourage local manufacturers. If a imported product, for an imported product, if it takes a longer time, a significant less time is taken to give a registration for a locally manufactured product. So that is an advantage that any investor could take. So apart from that, yes, Act was done in 2015. Our NMRA, we are from the time they started up to now, they have learnt a lot. People have they have undergone a lot of training, and even every year before pandemic, they were training from WHO and other authorities of the world. So I can say that we are getting there.
Mahotara, question from the audience. It is great that Sri Lanka is offering investors to participate in this great venture. How does one safeguard the export aspect of pharma until such time that they obtain WHO certification, which takes approximately 2 years?
Good question, Savitri, and I'm sure the gentleman here will tag along as well. So it depends on what type of manufacturing entity that's going to set up. Now, if it is a greenfield manufacturing entity, like what Sanjay has set up in Avesta, there is a long process in terms of getting the approval. But if it is a multinational who's going to come in with the processes that is being vetted with the same set of equipment and all that, the audit takes much less time. And I think it is then if it is then again it's a setup that is been already checked for product stability and so on. So for that 2.5 years becomes much smaller, right? And I think during that time, I think the product stability of the initial part has to do anyway, whichever the plant. Then the EU GMP and all those facility things you shorten. In the meanwhile, if the certain standards are met, there are mechanisms you could still export into programs that is in place. They may not be the developed countries that you want to be in or the brand names that you want to do it, but there is a export market still, intermediary market available. Then of course, if the quality standards are done, and if, as Sanjay mentioned, if the NMRA is here to make sure that drugs of the higher quality is brought into the Sri Lankan system as well. One advantage that you have is because it's manufactured here, you can verify every step of the manufacturing process, which an importer, if Sri Lanka was importing or SPC was importing, would not get the full visibility if it was brought in from outside. So in the meantime, there's ample opportunities for them to take advantage and keep the business going. It may be not be at full 100%, but it's not that you have to wait for 2.5 years and need to cover the cost and only then you start your production.
And two more points to that, Savitri, is that some of us are already well on our way to get these international certifications. So there again, people who partner with us, you can get the benefit of that work that we have been started several years ago. The second thing is that to fast track this international approvals, you can do what is called a site transfer. So if somebody is already manufacturing, say in a European country or any country that's exporting to Europe, they could register say our plants as an alternative plant if they're satisfied with our plants, and do a site transfer and expedite that so that it doesn't take 2 years, it's much shorter.
And this is just a question on R&D. Given that there's a lot of investment in the pharma industry on R&D, do we have the capabilities to carry that through?
Well, I don't think we have that just yet, but I don't think that should be a barrier, because there are plenty of research, contract research organizations in India, around in the region, which we can easily tap into their R&D for new formulations. You know, it's I think we have several more years to get into become a R&D hub. Having said that, you know, our graduates are, you know, they are going to start master's programs, PhD programs, our universities, and that's what's needed to create a R&D hub. So we will still be depending on either big companies to do the R&D for us or contract research organizations to do the R&D for us, unless they are very basic formulations, which we can do. But for the more complex, but that shouldn't, you know, that shouldn't stop any investor, because these formulations can be easily acquired, purchased, and you do what is called technology transfer to plants here.
And again, Sanjay, both Sanjays, how can Sri Lanka's pharma industry actually add value to the existing supply chain so that, again, we optimize what we have? You start.
Okay. Adding value to the existing supply chain would be addition of new products, adding of new molecules, adding of new dosage forms would be the ideal way to go. Also, there are other support industries. I mean, one is CRO, contract research organization, which we don't have in Sri Lanka. So there's an opportunity to either start with the government, maybe a private-public partnership, a place to do bioequivalent studies. These are needed for Sri Lanka. These are not, I mean, there are 2 universities that's doing, but they have limited capacity. So due to that reason, a company that is specializing in bioequivalent studies can come and sign up with either a university or a hospital, government hospital in Sri Lanka, and this, all by doing all this, will be all value addition for the current.
And some of these big companies in the region, you know, they focus on the very big markets, the US market, the European market, and for them, but every country in the world is asking for higher regulatory standards. Now, they might want to ask themselves whether they want to use their capacity to supply what are called rest of the world markets, you know, smaller markets, whether they would want to reserve their capacity, their high compliant capacity, to service mostly the big markets like US, and use companies like ours or you know, manufacturing in Sri Lanka to go to the, you know, maybe the smaller markets, but who are insisting. Even African markets are now insisting on very high standards, which they might be able to find in or develop in Sri Lanka. Again, the proximity is the key. You know, it's like a little ecosystem here. If we consider, if we, you know, ignore our political boundaries or whatever, you know, communication, flights, you know, we set up, for example, all our, during COVID, we had to establish massive machinery, all done online with technicians from India. Nobody had to come here. Our engineers figured out how to build machines the size of this room, how to install complex machinery just by online support. So with the technology and with, as long as you can, you know, understand each other, you can do lots of things being in the same time zone as India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Again, Sanjay, if we are looking at it's not just about manufacturing drugs or pharmaceuticals. There are also ancillary industries that you would need. What would these be, and what is the input you would need?
So I will give one example. In my company, we manufacture IV injectable in Sri Lanka. And there are at least 3 other plants are coming up within next 1 year to manufacture IV injectable. And there is no company in Sri Lanka that can supply the glass vials. Glass vials we have to import either from India or China. So this is one opportunity straight away. I think across 4 companies by end of 2022, there will be a huge value of need of glass vials in the country. This is one. So and also in terms of these glass vials we have to use something called a rubber stopper. Sri Lanka has a huge rubber industry in terms of making everything else to do with rubber. That's one of our largest exports. But there's no company to manufacture that sterile rubber stopper. So these are some of the opportunities. These are just 2 I mentioned. There are many more. Doesn't just have to be pharmaceutical, doesn't just have to be medicine per se. There are so many other supportive industries. API, active pharmaceutical ingredients, then primary packing material for tablets, capsules or syrups or all that. None of those are made in Sri Lanka. All that we have to depend on. These are opportunities that anybody can take, and it's sort of a low-hanging fruit.
In addition, Savitri, now if you take our market is still, the public sector is still very buy loose medicine. But in India and most countries now, it's all blister pack, especially for NCD drugs. It keeps the freshness. So there's a massive opportunity to do blistering for people to come from overseas and do blistering here, because there's no that kind of specialized pharma packaging companies here. Testing is another big thing. We spend lots of money as we invest this $150 million in new plants. Everything we make has to be tested by external testing houses. So a lot of opportunity for testing labs, bioequivalent studies, people who do all that to come and set up here. And they can service countries around the world, because the cost of doing business is much lower here and the ease of doing business is easier here.
2 areas. One is Sri Lanka's very fast aging population. Actually, the world has a very fast aging population. 2, NCDs. What areas should we be exploring when we are looking at these?
So, NCDs in the pharma emerging markets is probably, probably more than half the drugs are going for NCDs. We have some of our, endocrinologists here are world-class researchers into these areas, and they do, a lot of research into this area. This is the area where Sri Lanka also has a huge incidence of NCDs. Highest rate of deaths, premature deaths are coming from NCDs. So one of the best ways to manage NCDs is through medication. So there is this huge growing. If you take that therapeutic areas, they are all double-digit growth in volumes.
Yeah, even this NCD, huge pharmaceutical. Then, in addition to that, this aging population, geriatric population, they also have this NCD issue. So this is double. The requirement for the pharmaceutical is double. So very expensive pharmaceutical we spend for this. For the lifelong, you have to take. Once you had it NCD, then it is lifelong.
One of the things the Honorable Minister was saying is the other day was that combination medicine is very useful, important to fight NCDs. People don't like to take 5 different tablets. And today the technology is there.
Molecular medicine.
Yes. Technology is available to come and set up here. Massive demand there will be in Sri Lanka. The regulators will be very happy to give approval to do combination drugs to fight iron. That's the future for all the world.
Mr. Mohta, if we're looking at infrastructure for setting up, how good are we? How competitive are we? And what more needs to be done if there is?
I think if you look at the infrastructure point of view, I think there's capital outlay, and then I would say the infrastructure in terms of services that you provide for a factory to continue in point of view. I think Secretary also mentioned there are 3 zones under development, and the largest of being in Hambantota. Now that is a 400-acre pharma park, and I think some may look at in larger parks being developed in neighboring countries and say like, well, it's small. But I think the uniqueness of it is that it's actually sandwiched between our second international port and our international airport, the second international airport. So you can actually do sea air logistics with much ease. So you can have regional accumulation, you can do sorting, packing, conso, deconso, and you can actually have quite good access. The second best part of it is it is a brand new development. It will come with all the approvals you need. Now, pharma is a highly regulated on the output point of view as well, also the input point of view in terms of setting up environmental, because you may have very, I would say, environmentally detrimental effluents and all that. So this zone is pre-cleared for any type of drug. Now, whether you manufacture a simple molecule like a Panadol or a paracetamol, to a biosimilar, whether it is a cancer drug, or oncology, or whether it's an API, all is being cleared. And there's multiple ways of waste disposal as well, right? Whether it's evaporation, whether it's a sea outfall. So if you think of it as it's a package, and then common infrastructure is going to be built in for that. So that means the freezer facilities, the raw material handling. NMRA is planning to build a testing facility there, so approvals, on-site, all the facilities required. So then you're creating and quite quick access. From Colombo, it's very quick to get there with the highways and port next to it and the airport, as I talked about. So then you bring down the setup cost, setup time, because time is money at the end of the day. Because if it is 6 months, 1 year or more that would have taken otherwise in a normal zone or a BOI zone or even outside, it's even more complex. And then the headache of wastewater and waste disposal is taken care of. Then you come in, you set up, fast track approval from NMRA and all those regulators. And then the second part of it is the setup cost. As BOI, we have taken out any type of cost that you have as additional cost you have as taxes. So there's 0 taxes on any of your capital input. And your production material is also tax-free. Also, your profits are also tax-free. Okay. So if you think about all that, you're basically getting a sweetener or a better deal than anybody else in this part of the world. Then it's about the running cost. And I think most of us are very clearly compared and said, what's the cost differential you get in electricity? Because there's one of the critical components that's going into pharmaceutical manufacturing. Water, of course, we have 104 rivers going around, and we have one of the best in terms of the water sufficiency. So there's ample water, there's no issues on that. The zone pricing is very competitive. Then it's the quality talent pool, access to quality talent pool, because we are one of the most competitive, I would say by far the competitive location on productivity adjusted talent. And there's no salary inflation. I mean, salary inflation is again the lowest. I mean, these are good things for an investor. For an individual who can say like, well, I would like my salaries to go up. But I think the other thing is like the loyalty for an organization when people join. So that is inherent in the country. And I think in that sense, your cost of setting up, the time to set it up has also come down. So that is what the holistic orchestration, private and the public sector get together we are doing. So that way, we are very cost competitive in terms of setting up here.
Yeah, adding to our Sanjay's this thing, our road network, and we have now excellent developed road network, even highways. It is because all these zones are linked.
Yeah, interlinked.
Nice interlink for the airport and port and all. That is good advantages for these.
And also, I think, like Murtaza said, the digital infrastructure
Yes, of course,
would be an advantage, because
advantage, yes.
you've had experience of setting up entire machinery rooms, literally,
Absolutely.
just on internet
Absolutely,
facilities.
Yeah. I mean, we have excellent digital connectivity across the island. We have, uninterrupted power, clean air, clean water. Even the cost of, the treatment of water here compared to a lot of our South Asian regions, water and air is the most key thing in a pharmaceutical plant. And we, have things like water systems, engineering companies, air conditioning companies. There's excellent, good local support to help us run these plants here.
And this is a question from the audience. I guess Mohtal would be the best. Can we supply ASEAN markets?
Typically, there's no regulatory barriers or bilateral treaties that is required for pharmaceutical. It is freely traded. So I think its importance is the quality and the cost. Now, either if you're a generic player, but if you are a branded player, absolutely. Meaning if you look at the branded manufacturing and the high, I would say, typically you go through the drugs were in patent and they're off patent. So typically when you have very specific molecules, high cost drugs or high value drugs, if I may say, they tend to gravitate towards locations like Singapore, right, or Ireland. And there are a few locations such in the world. And some companies may only have one plant or maybe two. One will be in Singapore, one will be in another location. But as they come off patent, meaning they would look at a location that could produce competitively and compelling way. The know-how can be transferred. The people would be can live, right? So the livability of a city also comes into play. And then still continue with the same. So if you are a branded manufacturer which is coming off, so you'll still have, your price will come down, but you'll still have access to the market which you have developed, right? And you have the competitiveness. Sri Lanka offers that opportunity of phasing out. But if it's a generic, again comes back to what is the value proposition in terms of the cost. If you actually are as competitive in terms of scale, what most of us are talked about, but also with the underlying supporting infrastructure, then it's a matter of the cost part. We can sell it anywhere, so there's no restrictions per se. Like you don't need a trade bi-party or a multilateral trade deal or trade openness for that.
I think the opportunities for Southeast Asia would be the more complex products, sustained release products. I think basic generics, we will not be able to compete because they have their own manufacturing. But if you take modified release, sustained release products, and create a brand there is an opportunity because we can be cost effective, but you need to have, you need to have a good product pipeline. But the challenges of registration in those markets remain. So you ideally, if you have a partner there who has the products registered and passes the technology to Sri Lanka to expedite the approval process, that would be the best way to work with those markets.
Yeah.
So this is based on a conversation we were having earlier, all of us. Somehow when you talk about the pharma industry, we only think of Western medicine and pills and packages and things like that. However, Sri Lanka has a huge competitive advantage when it comes to the eastern part of the medicine, whether it's the natural herbs and the knowledge that we have. How can we actually sort of optimize on that? How can we get that into the equation? And because the world is turning towards a lot of Eastern health and Eastern well-being, so
that's right.
How can we
yes.
optimize on that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on it, but we all know that our cinnamon is world class. Tea, we have a mature tea industry. We have turmeric and all these, and we have a huge amount of local wisdom and local knowledge. The challenge is to how do you harmonize and how do you say, make sure that there is standardization in these are plants, unlike chemicals. So the standardization process is very important, and one organization that is capable of doing this standardization is the Sri Lanka Institute of Nanotechnology, Advanced and Nanotechnology. So they have equipment to be able to do this sort of standardization. But if we can use our herbs, because the future is in this is they want to see full traceability from farm to farmer plant. The credibility will be there if you can establish that traceability from which batch of plants this was produced to which plant, and with our plants having GMP knowledge here, there's a great opportunity for us to supply to the world, but it is not. I mean, you see the Siddha lepers of the world today are exporting all over the world. So there is, we have our products have been accepted. Products like Samahan have been accepted in many parts of the world.
And Charlie, you were.
Meaning, I think if you look at traditional medicine point of view, the one thing that's always come to mind is the Chinese traditional medicine, or TCM. But if you look at Sri Lanka's Ayurveda history, and we've been a melting pot between the Indian Ayurveda as well as our indigenous Sri Lankan medicine. So I think if I look at this sector and I look at it with gleaming eyes in terms of the opportunity point of view, because there's so many. Because one of the things is, like, even if you look at the Western medicine, most of these molecules are derived from a plant-based material and then also synthesized afterwards, right? So if you look at our orally or Puskalopathy, say, like, and our traditional medicine, and there's one saying that I think it comes to just popped my mind, is you always say that the Sinhalese or Sri Lankan plate of rice is a plate of medicine. The type is like with moringa or whatever things that we use normally days. Now it's the craze of the food, right? It's a nutritious and what you call nutraceutical craze. So what I'm saying is, like, if you think about everything that we actually can offer, so there's a couple of things. One is there's a new molecule discovery that we can do from the medicine which is being used. So they're known and they're used because of because it worked for my grandfather, it works for whatever it is, and by what you call it. Through what's the word? Through not a clinical trial, but because it works and you use it. So there's value to do clinical trials and identify the active components and do it. So once you build these capabilities of drug manufacturing, that is the next part of it. If you think about this journey, this is a 10-year journey. So this is just the start of it. And I'm glad that you asked the question. So the idea is for Sri Lankan traditional medicine to be like Chinese TCM, be universal. And fortunately, we don't have very exquisite stuff in our medicine palette which will engage in any animals or anything. So we are all plant-based. The second part of it is that the whole wellness part that comes in life, right? So which is all the nutraceuticals and supplements and things that you want to know, right? Everyone knows about, even in the Western world, the value of pomegranate. It is a readily available fruit and also a medicinal part of it. So we haven't really got into to understand why it reduces cholesterol or what it matters and certain things, right? In the morning, many people normally say, it's a tradition in Sri Lanka, sometimes you get a spoon of turmeric with few seeds of pepper in a glass of milk. And if you really think about, curcumin is one of the most potent antibiotic in turmeric, right? And then unless you have a little bit of pepperine, you don't really absorb it. So, but now cannot that be put into a pill? Why not? So there are a lot you could do with it. And I think the important thing is on the supplementary part, you can do much easier. But on the medicinal part, it is there. But I think the important thing is for this to really take off, the clinical trials needs to come in. So it comes back in the whole circle about research being done, the talent pool that's been created. Then you have the manufacturing part of it is. But I think more importantly is at the end of the day, it connects back to the grower of this. Because Sri Lanka is 70% of the people toil with the soil, directly or indirectly. So because this is another way of increasing their value proposition, getting inclusive growth. So the Western medicine manufacturing is only the start. So then we are opening the door for all the know-how, the generations of know-how that Sri Lanka has to take it to the world. And why not, instead of TCM, we could be the traditional Sri Lanka medicine or Ceylon medicine, you call it.
Dr. Ratnayaka, if we look at the Ayurveda industry, how would the regulation and compliance sort of environment work?
Of course, that is not come under our regulation, but there have said their system under Ayurvedic Commission. That regulation is because there are a lot of graduate and ancestral Ayurvedic people and different Ayurvedic people. Regulation is not strong, but still they have there is a need for there to develop a good regulatory system, develop the Ayurvedic system. Otherwise, that's all I know.
Mr. Mohtar, just to find out from the audience, the pharmaceutical zones that are coming through, around when would the timelines be for operations to begin?
The Hambantota one is in the last bit of the environment clearance. We are in the process of readying it for allocating land. We already have ongoing discussions with the investors, and we have allocated some of the lands for some of the investors as well. The zoning is done because anyway, a factory build is about a 1.5-year journey. While doing that, we will have the ready supporting infrastructure. Water is there, power is there. The wastewater will be built within that period. So by the time the factories are being built, we will be ready from all the ancillary services we need to provide. So anyone who's interested, I will encourage to reach out, and we will facilitate in terms of getting.
Right now
is the time.
A good idea. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
And the other two zones?
The other two zones, the Oyamadu zone, the land preparation is done. So they have called for UI for entity to develop that. The one in Horana, that's already available for land.
Horana mill lab.
Yeah, mill lab. So it's already available for land allocation. It again depends on where one would choose, depending on the type of molecule or the type of product that you would manufacture.
So, in summing up, very briefly, I will ask all of you the same question. Let me start off with Dr. Ratnayaka. What would an investor gain, very broadly, if they invested in the pharmaceutical industry in Sri Lanka?
Definitely, there are very good opportunities, them, and tax-free, and no levy. They can invest more and more. There is ample opportunity because it is in between the supply chain. So they have huge opportunity.
And Mr.
Mohtal? I would say it's limited by how much they would like to dream. Because I think the opportunity, whether it's Sri Lanka market, whether it's a regional market, whether it's a global market, whether it is Western medicine or traditional medicine, I think the boundary can be pushed further depending on the appetite. It's not the lack of returns. I think we articulated how the returns are, and I think the gentleman is attest to their $150 million investments here. It's about how big you want to dream and where you want to play in the global arena, and how much Sri Lanka you want Sri Lanka to play in your global portfolio.
And Sanjay?
I would say it's faster access to market, because as I said, NMRA fast tracks all our local manufacturers' advantage. I'll give one example. We are allowed to register a product with 6 months stability studies. There's something called a stability study all companies have to do every product. And we are allowed to do that with 6 months data. In other countries, it's not allowed. So I would say once the plant is ready, with 6 months of stability data, quick entry into market.
I think it's a competitive location to manufacture. It's an easy place to do business. It's an easy place to live. Good local partners for any investor to work with, and consistent governments have been supporting local manufacture, and that will only get stronger and stronger, and a good talent pool as well.
That's a good summing up. Competing internationally, the local pharmaceutical industry has won tenders primarily because the pharmaceutical plants in Sri Lanka offer scale, and there is a critical mass of 15 manufacturers, with multinational GSK being among them, as Murtaza mentioned. And local players can be good joint venture partners to help navigate the local environment and also to overcome the hurdles. Growth lies mainly with new products which are niche and novel maybe, and with demand for NCD related products with increasing significant opportunity, also the aging population adding to that equation. There is a lot of potential, and not forgetting ancillary industries like Sanjay mentioned, those German industries like testing, packaging, even natural herbal products and options, which have immense potential here in Sri Lanka. Think about it. Thank you very much, gentlemen, each of you. And thank you all for joining us.